Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and today is a very different kind of video from our norm. It's one that's been bothering me for a good while now, and something that encompasses more than just Destiny. You'll excuse me as I utilize Destiny as the main point I refer to from my experience, but as I watch creators developing content to spark discussion and, in other ways, outrage, I ponder why this is the case as I see tone, mood, and possible changes swing into a more positive atmosphere. First, I want to establish a few typical things that most Destiny creators have come to accept. Many things are drastically wrong with the game, and have been since launch. This has been expressed by many, and in a lot of cases, some of the creators I want to highlight today have fought to make sure this notion is known. They've done a great job in being brutal with telling Bungie and Activision what we don't want to see. In many cases that they've presented, I've even agreed with them, adding their thoughts to my own. Like anything else, however, my thought process and opinions have altered with time, especially considering how Bungie has been communicating with us over the past few months. Really, since January, things have been on the up and up as far as ideas, possible development, a roadmap to showcase changes, and a bunch of communication on Reddit, Twitter, and elsewhere by community managers and sandbox designers, like Josh Hamrick, to name a somewhat not often named person. Again, I understand that there is something terribly wrong with Destiny 2, and know that it needs to be fixed up by Bungie within its current state. I know that those that have voiced against the game have done a great service in doing so, even if they were, in some cases, very harsh with their opinions. What bothers me more than anything is how these voices continue to focus on the possible negative associated with any updated story event while ignoring any good that has come of these updates. Now that we're pretty far into this already, I want to establish a few things. 1. I don't mean to attack anyone during this video. I hope to offer perspective and nothing more. 2. I know how a constant negative look into any kind of material can cause a skewed opinion and understanding. The same is true of the positive. 3. I want to add my feelings by the end of all of this so that I can add an element seldom included by the critics. With all of that said, let's take a peek at a couple creators. First up is YongYea, a guy I really enjoyed watching over the years thanks to being a Metal Gear fan. Naturally, I kept watching his content as he continued to cover other games because I enjoyed his perspective and thoughts. Recently, however, I've had to unsubscribe from his channel, and with exception of looking for a couple videos to remind myself of a few things, I've stayed away. The largest reason I've stopped viewing his content on Destiny or otherwise is knowing what Destiny and its developers want for the game, to see it change as quickly as they may be able to do so, but also take their time to get it right. Due to the tools that Bungie has, regardless of how difficult they may be to work with, as has been reported in the past, it's not an overnight or even month-to-month job. It just makes me wonder how often this has happened with other developers as stories have carried on. Again, you won't hear any contention from me that things with Destiny 2 were, in some cases still are, very wrong. The reason I took Yong's channel from my sub box was simply because of what topics he would focus on when talking about Destiny 2, and this really falls in place with another creator, one I actually do not really care for if I'm entirely honest. BDobbinsFTW is the other person in question, and I almost feel bad putting them in a similar statement, but they both tend to show the same general interpretation of news and events with Destiny, with one much more extreme than the next. Before you jump down my throat about the Dobbins comment, just give me a second. What gets to be difficult to prove about their standing is of a video by Yong that is no longer up on his channel. Both Jim Sterling and YongYea had commented on the loot boxes that existed with the Crimson Days event, where I recall them both erroneously speaking about needing to buy these loot boxes. Going off the silliness that was the Dawning, I know why this was the case, but those that participated in the event know Bungie made a very positive change to alter this discussion, and made it so the only way to get these loot boxes was by playing the game. Sterling pulled his video near immediately, while Yong pulled it sometime after. I say sometime after only because I have no idea when he may have pulled it. This is just to outline the integrity of Yong, and just to point out why I'm not bashing him. There starts to be a few pieces that, more recently, demonstrate the issue I've had with Yong past this one error. After the Go Fast update went live, players were ranting and reacting on Reddit over trying to find the different meta due to weapon balance and changes. Within Yong's video, this wasn't really touched on, while focusing on movement speed and time to kill in the Crucible as the major focus within his video. Time to kill is certainly a good conversation to have, but when the outlined patch notes in Bungie's website can showcase the updates made to weapons and weapons classes, I would hope it would be understood that Bungie is attempting to equalize and make weapons more on the same grounds as, say, auto rifles. The few posts he references in this video do not go over this piece of news, nor does the Reddit user that he's quoting seem to make this reference either. Using a few Reddit posts for news is an entirely different discussion, but just to cement the point that there were points missed within both narratives. Basically, Reddit is the salt factory that is part of the community. We know it exists. That's why I don't visit it. Realistically, this is a small point to what I'm going to be covering with Dobbins, perhaps the one that focuses a bit too much on outrage to get his points across. Beyond having thumbnails that say the same thing over and over, which made me do a double take when I looked over his catalog, the information within his most recent video reminds me that he will never be on board with the game or publisher ever again. Let me explain what I mean. Recently, Bungie brought a group of content creators together in order to possibly reach a consensus on what needed changing. This led to this group of creators almost entirely finding the experience to be a positive one. Being able to sit in front of each other on a face-to-face basis, that adds a different level instead of just over text over the internet. This opened up a lot of doors to see just how Bungie would set up the future or what it was they had planned for later. One such example of a story we heard from a few content creators that went was an idea that Bungie presented to the table of creators. The feedback from the creators was, no, people are going to absolutely hate that. They binned it and asked, what do you want to see? This, to me, shows an example of how open to listening they are, at least within that capacity. Other changes take time to balance and can't be knee-jerk reactions with what we're asking for when overhauling systems integral to the game itself. I don't hear this happening with many other studios where they pay for plane tickets, food, and lodging for top voices in a community to voice their disdain. Some of these guys came from overseas. You know how much it costs to get to Australia from the United States? It's not cheap. Dobbins' quote on this matter is as follows. Whatever moves they want to make, they'll win back people's confidence. They're already making moves, flying their influencers out there to get some feedback. Please, you don't gonna fly out these Twitch fools to get the feedback. They can just email stuff to you. It's a publicity stunt to make a show of the effort they're putting in. Honestly, I understand the rage behind how Destiny has been handled. I understand the basic principle behind why people are still not willing to give the game a chance, and that's not the end goal for myself here. My goal is to showcase that things are going in a direction that doesn't fit a negative narrative, at least quite as much, one that certain creators have been feeding off of for a while. Per usual, it's how you spin a story or have perspective over it. I'm not going to quote view numbers for these channels or what draws in attention for these two, since I think that has spoken for itself. I will say that once things start to settle down and move to change within Destiny, I still hear very similar statements from Dobbins and others time after time that sound more like the same conversations that we have had over 5 months ago. Statements that have long outstayed their welcome. I get it. I do. Just as much as there's hope for original content in gaming, however, I'd hope for it in the presentation of creators. It's also more of a challenge just to see if anybody can make a video without going full rage mode within this outrage culture. Who am I kidding? Those guys aren't even watching this. Simply put, the negative commentary gets views for some creators, just as they talk about how views are going to be the focus of trying to repair a situation that a company created. I don't hear the fact that Bungie could drop the project and be done with it at any given time. EA's proven enough to show off the cycle of killing off a publisher almost whenever they feel like it. Just food for thought when listening to the outrage side of things. Their view requires viewership just the same as the positive. I'm going to end this point by showcasing what happened with Jim Sterling just last month. His series, The Jimquisition, is generally a showcase of how the gaming industry is going, with talk about loot boxes, crappy Dynasty Warriors games, changes in terminology, and occasionally overviews of titles to show a more positive outlook over a franchise or series. This is why I like Sterling, most times, since he balances his viewpoint more often than not. One more recent episode is on the Yakuza series and just how awesome and underrated it is. Because it is. Anyway, within the first few minutes of the video, Sterling calls out one of the more prevalent reasons why a lot of his topics are generally more on the negative side, or at least bash practices over and over. If a lot of people watch it, that's good for me, and if not a lot of people watch it, well, you tell me to make nice and happy episodes, but none of you effers watch it, which for me is win-win. I mean, with a system like the Jimquisition being fully crowdfunded, I guess he's not entirely wrong, but it does go to show a difference in viewership. YouTube makes it pretty simple to compare views from video to video, and within the last 2 months, the Yakuza episode came in at the lowest point at 320,000 views at time of recording. Not that that's a bad number, but to compare, his next lowest video clocked at 340,000 views. And that was posted just last week, compared to Yakuza being out for about a month. His top view at time of recording over the last 2 months is about 550,000 for reference. This says something for what to expect of Sterling, and I suppose to an extent should tell you what to expect of Dobbins and YongYea. Being negative and having negative viewpoints does bring in more views. The question by some is why this happens, or how this gains any kind of ground. Well, let me pull up somebody within my own space of creation, DSR Joker. Joker has a very large tendency, especially lately, to create his content on a more negative end. What Joker does, however, is backs up his negative talk with a simple word: criticism. His topics are generally followed up with what else could be done, while still proudly using the Guardian he had from Destiny 1 as his character and voice. This is something that separates the negative voices from what I've shown here, where it's content for bashing and views versus content for constructive criticism. This is still to say Joker goes a bit too far sometimes, but I don't expect to agree with everyone's viewpoint every single time. Once in a while, sure. Constantly being a negative Nancy, now we have a problem. With all that being said, what does that lead to? Back in 2011, I had a rather nasty car accident. It totaled the vehicle I had and led me down a pretty bad spiral, with losing my job, dealing with insurance for several months after the fact, having to stress out my family and borrow vehicles. I'll spare you the boring stuff, but all of this led me to dealing with shingles at the age of 23. If you're not familiar with shingles, it's basically adult chickenpox, but it hurts. A lot. Take the worst pain you have, then amplify it. Well, maybe, depending on the ailment that you've suffered. The largest thing that led to this diagnosis was stress, and that stress came from my job, my car, and any other little bit of stress that may have added to that plate. I don't deal with stress very well. It taught me that not only is life too short to care about stressing over small things, it's to enjoy what is in your life, and hang on to things while they're there. I guess that's just me unsure of and really not understanding outrage culture. If something is no longer of interest to you, then just move on or let it sit for a while and come back to it. Causing yourself and others additional stress for things that may be helping them in times of trouble or hardship is far from a good thing for anyone. Added, being led with misinformation for the sake of views doesn't really help for other stress levels and only adds to the negative feeling of a medium. I enjoy making content for Destiny, and I won't keep that any bit of a secret. I'm constantly looking for ways to improve my content and improve myself, but I refuse to do that by bringing myself to a negative level, which is what I start to see from a subset of a subset. YouTubers that talk about video games in a negative way. In some cases, rightfully so. But there's an element of balance to be had here. I know I have brought up a few things negatively, like the grimoire being removed and why that was a major miss, or how certain gameplay and story elements haven't gone well, but I've still offered up why it's a miss, how to fix it, easily. It doesn't necessarily mean I expect that Bungie's going to listen, but at least I put my voice out there, and that's the point, to try to fix it. There's this word that I feel many have forgotten about over the past several years: passion. Passion simply defines as a strong and barely controllable emotion. The idea of passion can expand to any kind of media or daily task, so long as you feel interested in it. For me and for others, Destiny has been a passion that we care for and want to see thrive. We've been saying that for a good while now, of course. Perhaps the lore community of Destiny has been hoping for a bit more or less, depending on your outlook, than the guys in the Crucible or otherwise, but I'd argue that many of us know what's there and want to see it succeed and do well. This is similar energy to what I felt with the Metal Gear series, Dark Souls, and Elder Scrolls franchises, just to name a few. Then again, I seem to recall being picked on for liking Metal Gear back in the day too. The industry as a whole hasn't been in a great position. We see games like Mass Effect Andromeda, Battlefront 2, Call of Duty, The Division, Warframe. Oh, come now, these games took 3 to 4 years to get their formula right. Not that it's any different from Destiny, and they're still working on that, which I'll wholeheartedly admit, but, in a world of patch it later, this has been something we've just started to tell developers that we're okay with. The former couple of games, Andromeda, Battlefront 2 for instance, definitely showcase a lack of being in touch with gaming culture. And though they garnered a set of their own outrage, not every case is similar. And the persistent world of Destiny seems to be a pretty common target in an industry that seems to be full of the same constant issues within other titles. Destiny just has the possibility of being something bigger, and for some, that might be the biggest frustration of all. That, and the guys at Bungie are generally pretty upbeat and seemingly nice to talk to, and people hate others being happy. The people at Bungie are still people, however. Don't disregard that fact. Since I'm on the topic of going after popular franchises that like to screw with content, let's look at Fortnite and Overwatch for a second, since I don't seem to be receiving as much negative press for taking game modes away, or for pulling in a large audience with an uncertain future. I used to play Overwatch pretty heavily and put it down pretty quickly when they decided to take away content in the form of events and Retribution's game mode. Fortnite just makes me wonder what else is going to happen, as I do with most early access titles, free or not. Monster Hunter World may also have recent examples of time-sensitive events, but they're more generous with login rewards and reintroducing those events, even a month or so after they just happened. Speaking of, Monster Hunter World, God of War, Nier Automata, Horizon Zero Dawn, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, and a slew of other new titles seek to prove my statement and the feelings of many very wrong. I have hope for the industry, but I also have hope for those that are over at Bungie. At this point, I couldn't tell you why in some elements, but after my friend, Mylan Games, returned from the Community Summit at Bungie HQ feeling better about the game than he has in months, I'm filled with a bit more excitement. Mylan has gone on record that he would have been more content to just leave things as they were with his channel and exit on a high note. He's not someone that acts on feelings entirely, and generally speaking has a more level head than myself. I'm also filled with renewed hope for content and gameplay down the line to keep covering the game thanks to this group that is returning with nothing but positive vibes. Granted, this is also now on Bungie to deliver some of these elements that were discussed at the event. If you want last chance territory, this is it for many, I'm sure. It pays to be critical. It pays to give a little slack too and say, hey, this is a great job you've done. Don't let up while you repair your reputation and fix what's been done. I'll admit that the verdict is still very much out on the ideas of negative versus positive thinking. It depends on the person. The effects of constant negative thinking include increased chance of stroke, heart attack, and depression, having a skewed perspective of the world and your immediate surroundings. The problem with constant positive thinking leads to disavowing anything as wrong or leading to being out of touch with what might actually be going on in one's life. Again, having a mix of both allows for a balanced lifestyle, something that also leads to balanced criticism. So, there you have it. Scientifically, channels that spew negativity all the time and look at the world in a negative manner are just causing you to not only be a Debbie Downer to the conversation, but they're also giving you increased chance of not having a great life. In a few different ways. Tweets like the one seen here only amplify my thinking that negative voices aren't helping to grow any community either. Honestly, I'm taken aback by stuff like this. Oh, but this is just how the world works. Well, there you go with that biased negative thinking again, because it certainly doesn't have to be that way. What you're prone to is not always right. Regardless, if you feel slighted, then the best thing you can do is just distance yourself from the title or following and move away to something else. There's a side to the community that seems to be ill-represented, the side that plays to play and have fun. To simply focus on hating it and to not bring any kind of conducive or critical questioning and constructive feedback to the table, then you're just part of the problem. I would much rather see that energy be put to something like a story you want to write, a career you want to take, or heck, another game. Go have fun. I'd argue that's the most important thing to find within a game, whether that be for a story, gameplay, or otherwise. We all game for different reasons. It's asinine to assume we all do so for the same reasons, or play the same games because you feel one game is stupid. I understand what I've said here today is going to only influence those at YongYea and BDobbins channel to either scream at me, get upset with me, or just have some extra publicity, all that a channel of 21,000 strong can influence. That's part of having a point to share and using examples to do so, unfortunately. Some will not be happy with anything you do. Some will continue to focus on the negative no matter what you do. I remember a time when I was like this with Square Enix, but with time they have started to prove me wrong. Hopefully, as we've voiced our opinion over 2017, we gave a clear message to those in charge to stop screwing around with the medium that we love. Just to stress it, there's a difference between calling something to attention and then just harping on it for the sake of getting some attention. There's a difference. The difference is noticeable by actions that creators choose to take on their channel. This video, if it gets big, should be proof enough for that. And to those that still don't want to play Destiny 2 or even Destiny 1, don't belittle those that find enjoyment out of it. I could say the same thing for several other franchises that are out there today and how stupid it might be to play them. But being tolerant of other individuals' interests, especially in the category of entertainment and what we find entertaining, is just being a decent human being. It's called fun for a reason. However, if you need me to explain this in a negative way so you'll understand and you just don't know any better at this point, don't be a frickin' jerk. Thanks. I want to actually end on a quote by Elon Musk. If you go back a few hundred years, what we take for granted today would seem like magic. Being able to talk to people over long distances, to transmit images, flying, accessing vast amounts of data like an oracle, these are all things that would have been considered magic a few hundred years ago. We haven't had this level of technology to produce games in the fashion that we do for more than a couple of decades, really. Most of it is incredible and some of it is simply taken for granted. I get that some of you are probably too young to remember some of the older Atari or Nintendo systems, but you've still witnessed how fast technology has moved. Certain games are made with different purpose, and to expect every single one of them to fit the exact same bill of having a purpose devalues titles that are simply made for fun, or just turn your brain off and relax. High octane is not always the point. As ever, just be good to each other. Be critical to help improve one another, but also remember to be good to each other. Also, don't let anyone talk down to you for liking something they may not. That's just silly. I'd love to hear your views on this below in the comments. I know this is extremely different from the norm for me, and it's exercising parts of my mind I haven't accessed in a little while. I know this was also long-winded, but when trying to prove a point in a world of fake news, you're trash, and dead game, it makes it harder to have any kind of actual conversation. Life is not a meme, kids. If you enjoyed this, however, you know the buttons to press. If you do decide to subscribe, however, just know that Destiny, Monster Hunter, and other games are my main focus. Opinion pieces like these are far from my norm. Also, don't forget to click on the bell if you want notifications when I upload videos, because YouTube is worse than anyone else I've mentioned in this whole video. Fact. Just fact. I thank you all again for watching, and I'll see you next space time. Take care.